I review what little I know about Jamie, gathered from rumors and a brief conversation. First, I remind myself firmly he has a girlfriend. He also has an interesting scar on his face. He used to be a figure skater. He's Cherokee, but isn't connected to his tribal community. I wonder if it was hard to move around all the time. I wouldn't know. I've lived in a Sioux since I was 3 months old and have always been surrounded by family. The Firekeepers are one of the oldest families on Sugar Island. In addition to the dorm on the hill with my grandfather's name, there are streets in town named after Grand Mary's people. They were some of the first French fur traders who showed up centuries ago with the Catholic missionaries. I'm definitely local. Yet, even with such deep roots, I don't always feel like I belong. Each time my Fontaine grandparents or their friends have seen my Ojibwe side as a flaw or a burden to overcome. And the less frequent but more heartbreaking instances when my Firekeeper family sees me as a Fontaine first and one of them second. When they say things about the Zaganash and then a beat later, remember that I'm in that room too. It's hard to explain what it's like being so connected to everyone and everything here, yet feeling that no one ever sees the whole me. That's a quote from Firekeepers Daughter by Angeline Boulley. This is YA Book Chat, and I'm your host, Leah Stuhler.
These days, more authors are including mental health content in their books. But do you ever wonder how accurate some of this stuff is?
Or do you ever read something where you know the author just gets it?
I'm Elise.
And I'm Priscilla.
And we are Novel Feelings, a podcast where we discuss mental health issues in fiction novels.
We are psychologists and book lovers, and we have a lot of opinions.
So look for Novel Feelings wherever you get your podcasts.
Now, back to your show.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of YA Book Chat. As always, thank you for being here and for listening. I really appreciate all of your continued support. Today, I'm going to be covering a book that's quite a bit more serious than any of the other books that I have covered before, but I am excited to cover it because it's got some subject matter in it that I think really needs to be talked about. I'm going to be covering Firekeeper's Daughter today by Angeline Boulley, and to join me in covering this book today, I have my friend Victoria. You guys know her. She has been here plenty of times before. And as you all know, usually if Victoria is here, that means our episodes are going to be a little bit longer than usual, but it's fine.
I feel so called out.
It's both of us though. Yeah. It's not just you, Victoria. It's me too. It's fine. I love it. So it's great. And if people are here still listening, then they love it too. So it's fun. It works. It works. All right. Well, in case this is somebody's first time listening to the podcast, why don't you introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Like I said, my name is Victoria Coops, and I am a YA writer myself. Actually, my debut novel just got signed with Groundwood Books here in Canada. So I'm going to be a published author, published YA author, spring 2024. So that's very exciting. A little bit about me. I live in Canada, and that is where I work and play and create, and I live in the province of Saskatchewan. And so because of the book that we're talking about today, I would just like to kind of situate our conversation in recognizing Canada's colonial history. This is a practice that we do in Canada, in Saskatchewan, to just honor our history and our shared treaties that we have with Canada's first people, the Indigenous people of Canada. So, like I said, I live, create, play, work in Treaty 4 territory is what we call it, which is the ancestral and traditional homeland of the Cree, Dene, Saulteaux, Dakota, Lakota, Nakota, and Métis nations. These are Indigenous nations, Indigenous tribes, as you would say in the States, of people who came before my people immigrated to Canada. I am a white presenting person. I have Asian heritage, and my family, all sides of my family, moved to Canada to live and work and play on this land. To do that, we took land away from the First Peoples. And so because we're going to be talking about a book that I think is really, really important, I kind of wanted to start with the land acknowledgement. And I'm just really, really excited to be here and to be talking about a book that I care so deeply about and kind of share a little bit of my passion for Indigenous rights and equality. So yeah, that's a little bit about me. Thanks, Leah.
Of course. And, along with Victoria, I also feel like, because of the book that we are covering and its content, but also in general, I feel like it's really important to acknowledge the Indigenous peoples who lived in the United States as well. I mean, they were here first. So, and unfortunately did have land that was taken away from them. So I did a little bit of research. I've never done a land acknowledgement before, but I discovered there were actually quite a few different tribes that lived in South Carolina, but the area where I live, it was actually the Cherokee tribe. So it's Cherokee land. And I love hearing that. We actually have Cherokee represented within this book.
Everything is connected. That's really cool. I didn't make that connection when you told me your research of your nations and stuff. So that's really awesome. Cool.
Yes, we have a character who is Cherokee. So which we'll talk about soon. So before we do get into this book, though, I do want to give you guys a content warning. This book deals with some very heavy topics. So I wanted to give a content warning for today's episode. It will follow the normal outline of, the first 15-ish minutes being spoiler free and then going into spoilers. But again, I need to give a content warning because a lot of what's in here could be very triggering for people. So just as we go into this, please be aware that there is gun violence, drug abuse, sexual assault, and physical violence that occurs in this book. And so as we get into discussing it, Victoria and I will be talking about each of those things, including the sexual assault. So I will give another trigger warning later, but I just wanted to kind of give that content warning before we even get started on things here, just to make sure everyone is aware so that if you're not comfortable, then, you don't have to listen to the episode. So again, we are talking about Firekeepers Daughter by Angeline Boulley, and here is a spoiler-free plot overview for you. 18-year-old Daunis Fontaine has never quite fit in, both in her hometown and on the nearby Ojibwe reservation. She dreams of a fresh start at college, but when family tragedy strikes, Daunis puts her future on hold to look after her fragile mother. The only bright spot is meeting Jamie, the charming new recruit on her brother Levi's hockey team. Yet, even as Daunis falls for Jamie, she senses the dashing hockey star is hiding something. Everything comes to light when Daunis witnesses a shocking murder, thrusting her into an FBI investigation of a lethal new drug. Reluctantly, Daunis agrees to go undercover, drawing on her knowledge of chemistry and Ojibwe traditional medicine to track down the source. But the search for truth is more complicated than Daunis imagined, exposing secrets and old scars. At the same time, she grows concerned with an investigation that seems more focused on punishing the offenders than protecting the victims. So now, as deceptions and deaths keep growing, Daunis must learn what it means to be a strong Anishinaabe woman and how far she'll go for her community, even if it tears apart the only world that she's ever known. So that was the book jacket that I read. I wanted to read that for you guys to summarize the plot because I feel like it's very complete.
Yeah, it is very, it covers kind of all the story beats, right?
Yes.
In a really good way. So
we'll be back after a quick break.
Are you passionate about writing or just love the arts? Tune in to the Poetry Podcast with A. Discover the latest trends in the industry, enjoy insightful book reviews, participate in Q&As, listen to captivating poetry readings, and get inspired by author interviews. We release episodes on the first 3 Thursdays of each month. Don't miss out. Come check us out at the Poetry Podcast with A.
Yes, it does. It's a very good overall picture of what happens in the book. Now, I will say, as we're going to go into talking about our overall thoughts about the book, and again, we're still in the spoiler-free zone. So I feel like, I don't know, I must not have really read that summary before reading the book, or I did, but I just didn't think that it was going to go the direction that it did. I just felt like when I started reading it, as I got more and more into it, I was kind of surprised by stuff that was happening. And I was like, this is not at all what I expected, because I felt like anytime that I saw it talked about on Instagram or other places, I was not at all given the impression that it's as heavy of a book as it is. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, I get what you're saying. I think, like, after having read it, and this is a spoiler-free observation, like, I think it's a very honest story. I feel like just the way the story is told is very direct and it's very honest. And so I'm not surprised that it includes the content it did, but it presents as a very like upbeat almost story. Like, the color is gorgeous. It's like beautiful, beautiful color and all these vibrant hues and Indigenous style art. Like, it's just a gorgeous color, like, or cover. It's one of my favorites out of books that were like published last year. And so it kind of presents as like a very sunny, bright novel. And then, yeah, on Instagram, like on Book Talk, the places that it was being highlighted, people were just raving about how fantastic it was. But I feel like I didn't see a ton of like content warnings or things about it. So I really appreciate that you led with that, because there's definitely heavy content, but like based on the colonial history of Canada and the United States, like, that's not surprising that heavy content is included, right? Because it's a believable story, I guess, which can get pretty dark. So
yeah,
I like that it didn't pull punches, but I get what you're saying. It just presented as like a very bright story, and then you're like, oh, we're talking about heavy things, which is appropriate. So
yeah,
it can be both, I guess, right?
It can be. It is, and it's very good. It's very good. And I feel like it's definitely a story that needs to be told. It's very realistic. And again, I feel like there's not enough representation in literature of Indigenous people, Native American culture. And so, like, for me, I really loved reading this book and soaking up all of that culture and learning more about it. And I actually listened to it on audiobook. And so I was, hearing all of the ways that she was pronouncing the different words in the native language. And then after I picked up the hardcover book, looking at the words, I was like, wow, I am glad that I listen to this on audiobook, because I don't know that I would have been able to pronounce them very as well from just reading it in the book, which may have hindered my enjoyment of reading it, or my experience with reading it. So I'm glad that I listened to the audiobook first. But yeah, I just wish that it had a content warning at the beginning of the book. Now, in all fairness, because she is going to listen to this episode, well, Victoria gave me a warning, who's with me here, but Sarah also gave me a warning. She's going to be like, Leah, I told you. And she did tell me. The problem is that by the time I got into it and started reading it, I totally forgot that both of you had warned me about the sexual assault and the content. And so then when it hit, I was like, oh, whoa, where did this come? Like, by the time I got to that part, it was just shocking to me. So I was like, oh, okay.
Well, and I mean, I think that kind of shows or demonstrates how like masterfully Angeline Boulley does of making the reader buy into the story, right? Like that even with myself and Sarah explaining or giving you a content warning, that you were just so invested in the story. And like, it does deal with hard things at the beginning of the story, but like kind of the trauma doesn't really pick up until like midway through. And so So you have time to kind of feel comfortable in the story, and then boom, things start getting really hard. And and like I think Angeline Boulley did a masterful job of kind of like bringing the reader through that process, right? Because that's what life is like when traumatic things happen to you. It's not that you expect them to happen, right?
Right.
So anyway, yeah, I agree. I wish, and this is just a general note for all publishers and all publishing industry insiders, I just wish we were at a point where we were putting content warnings at the beginning of books like we do with every other like media, right? There's content warnings at the beginning of television, of movies, of podcasts, of video games. Like we have a way of rating all those things for every other media, but for literature, we somehow think people are like exempt from needing that, when it's kind of the opposite, in my opinion, when like a book is such a personal experience, right? Like you're in the story with the characters. And so that whole self-insertion is like puts people at a higher risk. So like, come on, publishers and editors and industry people, like give us those content warnings, because people are still going to read the book. Like we told you.
Right. You both told me, and I'm like, and I was like, okay, I'm still going to read it. It's, and I will say props to Saba Tahir and her publishing company for her brand new book, All My Rage, because I just picked that one up, and it does have a content warning at the very beginning of the book. And just from reading, I kid you not, like the first chapter, I was like, oh, wow. Yeah, this is going to be another heavy one. In fact, I stopped because I was like, I need a break. I can't read another heavy one right after this one. But I am going to read it. I am going to go back to it. But I very much appreciated that there was a content warning at the front of that book before it even starts saying, this is going to deal with all of these different things. So, we want you to be aware of that, because again, as much as I love this book, I just wish that it had that in it. And it's hard because it's so realistic. It's so realistic, which is great. Like people go through all the things that happen in this book. People are sexually assaulted and physically abused, and people use drugs and are murdered like senselessly. But it's just that, especially right now with the state of things, people are a lot more anxious and dealing with mental health issues. And so I think it's just really extra important to make sure that those content warnings are being put in there so that people know, like, okay, yes, I can read this right now, or I'm not in a state of mind where I can read this right now, and maybe I need to wait and come back to it later.
Yeah. And I think it's just an act of compassion, right? Like that we would include those content warnings for readers, because readers are going to know their boundaries, right? And as an industry, being respectful of those boundaries should be more important than I think we've made it in the past. And like I think the main argument is that we don't want to scare people away from reading books like this, like reading a novel like Firekeeper's Daughter, which is so important for people to read, especially like white presenting people who benefit from being in a position of power. It's important to have that like exposure and insight into different cultures. And Firekeeper's Daughter does that on so many levels. And I guess like the argument is that if there was a content warning, then maybe fewer people would read it. But I don't necessarily agree with that. I think that people are going to read it because it's an important book to read, but you want to give them, you want to set them up for the best reading experience, like you said, so that they don't just shut down when it gets hard, right? Because then that's kind of counterproductive to the intention. So anyway, I do think like a content warning or something would have been excellent.
Yes.
But that's a whole industry thing, right? Like I don't know how many publishers are doing that. I'd be kind of interested in finding out, because I think it's a trend that should continue. There are websites though. There are like blogs and websites that keep track of different triggering content in a variety of books. Like I know Goodreads has started having like some of the reviews will include content warnings, and there's like a few blogs that I've used in the past that will just be like an ongoing list of very, very popular books like Firekeeper's Daughter, and it will list some of the content warnings. But that's like a lot of responsibility for a reader to go out of their way and find those things. Anyway,
it is, but it's fine.
It's fine.
So I will say, like, there were lots of things that I loved about this book. I did love the realism and the realisticness of it, because I feel like, I mean, now don't get me wrong, I love a good fantasy or sci-fi, like any day, you know, I need them. I need to immerse myself in those worlds, you know, quite a bit, but it is really important to understand the reality of things that happen to us or to other people, you know, on a daily basis. And the reality that life is not all rainbows and unicorns, you know, like, I think sometimes we just get so caught up in fantasy worlds and movies and things that we forget about the reality of some things, especially if we live a more privileged life and don't experience these types of things. But I don't think it's good to become blind to that. I think like it's really important to be aware of what's happening, so that we can help support those around us. So I appreciated all of that, you know, in this book. I also loved, like I said earlier, I just loved learning about the Native American culture and the Indigenous peoples culture, which I want to talk about more in depth when we get to the spoiler section. But it really caused me to like do more research on things that I hadn't known about before. And so I loved being able to learn all about that, because I am that person who's like, yeah, I don't acknowledge Columbus Day, like, you know, and these things, because I'm like, no, he actually did something bad. Like, I don't like, people are like, will ask me, your kids, you don't have off of school on Columbus Day? And I'm like, no, we don't do that down here. And you know what? I'm totally fine with it. Like, it's fine. Why am I going to celebrate this? So I was really happy to be able to learn more about these different things that I didn't know about. And I feel it's really important to learn so much about other people's cultures, especially Indigenous people who were here first and who white people kicked off of their land. Like, that's not okay. So she said, as a white person.
Well, and I think that's part of the reason that we situate ourselves in these conversations and totally are like approaching this material with a humble heart and with like that, like you said, like it made you want to learn more, right? And that's absolutely appropriate as a white person to engage with a story about a young Indigenous woman who's biracial, right? And that's part of that's part of one of the plot points in the story. And like, as white women coming to the conversation and looking at it, it's like all we can do is be humble, acknowledge our whiteness and our privilege thereof, and then learn and learn and learn and learn. And like, so for me, one of the reasons I love this book so wholeheartedly is because I'm married to an Indigenous man, and my husband is Cree, my daughter is brown, and like I have a lot of Indigenous relatives. I have like married relatives, but also chosen relatives, a lot of friends who are Indigenous. And actually my sister's best friend, she's a very powerful, very strong, young Indigenous woman. Shout out to Sierra. And she posted about this book, and what she said was that it made her feel seen. And like, I think that is one of the most powerful experiences, and it's one that we've denied like marginalized and racialized peoples, right? We stole land, we brutalized, colonialized, we murdered, we did so much harm. And then now that we're starting to recognize that harm, we still don't allow space for Indigenous stories and voices to be telling us their histories, their traditions, their oral stories and written stories. And so this book made space for all of that, and it worked. Like, it worked so well that it was the Goodreads 2021 YA Book of the Year, right?
Yeah.
And that is just like, that just blows my mind that Angeline Boulley, who is an Indigenous woman, wrote this story for Indigenous youth and for all of us to learn from. And it successfully did that. It became really big and it created space for those voices, right? And I'm just like, everything in me loves this story for those reasons, because I think about my relatives and my husband and my daughter, and I'm like, how amazing that this is happening now when she's 2 years old. And by the time she's, old enough to read a book like this, I'm really hopeful that there will be many, many for her to pick from, right?
Yeah.
Instead of just one.
Right. And this was Angeline Boulley's debut novel. Like this is her first. I am always just in awe of these authors who come out with these debut novels who are just like breathtaking and so beautiful. Like, because there are definitely some that you read their debuts that you're like, okay, yeah, like it's good, but it's, you can tell it's like a debut, it's their first time. And then like, as they write more and more, their writing, develops and gets better, of course. But then there are these books like this one that come out, it's a debut and it's just a masterpiece is right from the start. And you're like, okay, all right, well, you did that. Thank you.
And I just want to fangirl about Angeline Boulley for 2 seconds, because she's amazing.
Right?
I am so in love with her. And like, before we started the episodes, we were talking about like authors who are automatic buys. She has published 1 book so far, but she is definitely on my like automatic buy list. And part of that is because I think she did such an amazing job with Firekeeper's Daughter. I can't wait to see what she does next. But also because like, she is in her 50s, which to publish a debut novel in your 50s can be really challenging. There's a lot of barriers in publishing, especially as a racialized woman. And so like, the fact that she didn't give up at some point in the process, that can be very gatekeepy and very toxic, and like racist, like, let's just say what it is. She still did it, and she got an agent and she published, and then like, this was obviously a story that needed to be told because it resonated with so many readers. And I'm just like, yes, like I just so team Angeline Boulley. And she liked a tweet that I sent to her when I was reading this book. And I'm like, again, feel very seen by her. So I'm like #1 fangirl in her fan club. But
I love that.
Like, it is so impressive, right? Debut novel at, I don't know, she's in her 50s, mid 50s, and like with an agent and all this success. And I'm just like, yes, celebrate Indigenous excellence. Let's do it.
Yes. And she herself is an enrolled member of the Sault Ste. Marie tribe of Chippewa Indians. And so she writes about, I mean, obviously with this book, like she's a storyteller. She's written other things too. I think this is like her debut novel, but I think she's done some other smaller things. And she's writes about the Ojibwe community in Michigan's Upper Peninsula. And she's also the former director of the Office of Indian Education at the U.S. Department of Education. So that's really cool to be in that place and have that kind of influence, and then be able to write this novel like this as well. And then, and then she wrote it takes place, Firekeeper's Daughter takes place in Sault Ste. Marie area and Sugar Island in Michigan, where Angeline is from.
That's another reason I love this book. Like, the setting is so beautiful and wonderful and well done. And it's like a very historic, like the Ojibwe nations, the confederations, there are so historic and like relevant to North American history. And I think it's like kind of a part of history that we like gloss over, and we kind of pretend like that people weren't sophisticated before white people came or something. Right. And so like, I love that she tells this story between Canada and the United States, because like,
Mm-hmm.
which is kind of fun for you and me to be talking about it too,
Yeah.
right? Because I'm Canadian and you're in the States, and it's just like to have that story be told kind of over the border that was drawn there, and that's addressed in the book, right? Like, so,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, she just has such rich insight and details to
She
how she
does.
sets the story. So good. So good.
Now, on a fun note, I did also enjoy the love trope in this book because it was fake relationship to real relationship. And I don't know about you. Well, I do know about you, but I know that you like this too. I love the, like, every time I read a book and they're like, let's pretend to be boyfriend and girlfriend for whatever the reason is. I'm like, ooh, this is going to be good, because then it's going to turn into a real relationship. And I love that. That's fun. And then there's also the, like, we're like taking a forced trip together as well, for a weekend. Oh, while we're having this fake relationship. These are like two of my favorite love tropes here put together in one. So I really enjoyed that aspect of this book as well.
Yes, and I love that you're like, I do know you, because those are also like two of my favorite romance tropes. Probably, like, I would put fake dating right under or almost equal to like enemies to lovers, which is maybe my ultimate favorite romance trope. But like fake dating is very, very close, because usually there is an adversarial kind of component to fake dating. It's like, you don't want to have to do this, but we have to for whatever reason. And that's the case in Firekeeper's Daughter. So
it is.
And it's like, I love like, you're right, it is fun, right? The way she explored the romance in this story was fun, and still had like maturity to it. Like, I mean, that as the characters are mature characters, and so it's interesting. Like, it's an interesting romance, and it's a lot of fun. And the tropes are just chef's kiss. So good.
They are.
I just feel like I keep ending with like, it's so good. It's so good. But it's because
it is so good. It's one of those books. We're just going to do this a lot during the episode, and it's going to be fine. It's great. That just, means that people need to understand that it's just is that good, and they should read it. So, All right. Speaking of which, I think it is time to go into our in-depth conversation with spoilers now. So again, just a reminder about the content warning. There is drug abuse, there is gun violence, there is sexual abuse and physical violence as well. And so sexual assault, I should say. And so just be aware of that as we do go into the next portion of the conversation. But again, if you have not read the book and you don't want anything spoiled for you, then this is where you would stop listening and then come back and listen to the rest of the episode after you have read the book. But of course, if you have read it and if you are okay with the content discussion, or even if you haven't read it and you just don't care about spoilers, then by all means, please continue listening to the rest of this episode. All right, here we go. So the first thing I did want to talk about was all of the Native American culture that is mixed into this. And again, and also along with that, Daunis being biracial, because that's huge, like I have no experience with this. I am purely white Caucasian American. And so, I don't know what that's like at all, but I've read multiple books now where there is a main character who is biracial, and just the struggles that they deal with. And, it's a perspective of things that I haven't had to think about it before. And so it makes me wonder, what would it be like to not feel really accepted and not sure really who you are? Because she doesn't feel fully accepted by her Caucasian family, but she also doesn't feel fully accepted by her Native American side sometimes either. So, it's a big toss up and a big mix. And like, how do you define who you are as a person if you don't even feel accepted because of your racial background, your cultural background? So I was glad that was really explored in this, because it was like really in depth explored. It wasn't just kind of like a surface, like, oh, I don't know who I am. Oh man, part of me is this and part of me is this. It was like really in depth with how Daunis was feeling about it.
Yeah. And so like Daunis being biracial and having like mixed ancestry is something that really resonated with me, because I'm starting to unpack, like, my father's half Japanese. And I am very, very white. I'm a redhead. And usually the response when I tell people that my father is Japanese is that, oh, I can see it in your eyes. And so like there is some, like, it's a complicated issue because it's all about identity and what you feel inside and what you feel like you have access to. And I was pretty disconnected from that identity, but part of my work as a white person, understanding how I live on colonial land and what that means and implies for my relationship with this land, is acknowledging how I got to this land, right? Like, how did my people get here? And I have always been very like aware that my, you know, Scottish and my Norwegian and my like Dutch family got here as like Mayflower immigrants, right? Like that's like the picture I've had in my head about my ancestors. But I never, ever once like acknowledged that like my Japanese grandfather and grandmothers, that they got here, and like that was during World War II. There was a ton of racism towards Japanese people. My grandparents were thrown into work camps, POW camps, when they got to Canada. And so like there's just this whole piece of like my story that I kind of didn't ever feel like I could access. And it's because I present as white, and it's because of how I feel like I connected to that piece of my identity. And so like the struggles that Daunis is going through, where she feels like in between worlds, and not sure how to be a person in between worlds at times in the book, like that strikes such a deep chord. And I think as more people become kind of aware of their ancestors and their history, and maybe trying to indigenize their ways of being in North America as we decolonize, like there might be more of that, right? Like more struggling with identity, because either you're a settler, a newcomer to this country, or you're Indigenous, or I guess this nation, right? And so recognizing that as part of yourself is really important. And Daunis has to do that in this story. She has to reconcile those different worldviews, those different ways of being. And it's kind of painful and brutal at times, right? So that was something that really like struck a chord for me.
And I can totally see why. And the other thing too that Donna struggles with is because of, like, in addition to that, her father, who is the Native American, is also not looked well upon. Like, people don't look down upon her father because he was this like hockey star, and then did these bad things. And then so people also look on her in a negative light because they looked at her father in a negative light. So she's got like this, I don't know who I am, but then also like people don't like me because of my father as well.
Well, and that her father is gone. He died, right? And so like throughout the story, Daunis is struggling with these pieces of identity, and her main connection to her community as an Indigenous young woman is gone. And so like she has other relationships in the community that are life-giving and beautiful and vibrant, but like that main connection, not only is she like cast in the shadow of her father's mistakes, but she's also disconnected because she lives off reserve. She doesn't have her status, and she was raised in a white home in a white community. And so she was already kind of like viewed as a white person, but then in her white family and white community, she's not white enough. Right. And so that kind of gatekeeping of like identity is really hard, because I think like to a point we need to be honest and authentic in our kind of searching for our identities, and that's what Daunis is trying to do. But when it is to people's detriment and it's harming her, like that's kind of unfair and scary, right? When you can tell someone who they're supposed to be, like based on what you value, I don't know, that sets up for a lot of scary things, I think. So and that's like right at the beginning, because as soon as she's introduced, right? Like as soon as she's introduced, there's conflict around her identity.
Right away. So we get that aspect of it pretty quickly, and it's just kind of flows throughout the whole book. And I want to go back to something that you said too, because you talked about how she wasn't raised on and doesn't live on the reservation land, but she's also not what's called she's not an enrolled member of the tribe, which before reading this, I honestly didn't even know that was a thing. And I feel it's so horrible because I feel so ignorant right now, like saying that out loud, because I feel like I should know this. Now, am I expected to know everything about all these other cultures? No, of course not. But I feel like when it comes to Native American culture, like I feel like I should know more because they were here first, y'all. Like they were here first. And had it not been for them, the Pilgrims would not have been successful. I mean, they weren't successful at all until the Native Americans came along to help them. And then what did we end up doing? Turning around and, treating them horribly. So, but I feel like that's something that I should know, So when I was reading about it and I was like, oh, you have to become enrolled and be an enrolled member in the community. I didn't know that. So it was interesting to read about that and learn about that and how that all works, in that they have to apply for membership, and you have to do it like by a certain date. And then what I loved as far as that is concerned is when it came time for her membership, when she decided to become an enrolled member, she had to have recommendations from elders in the community who were already enrolled. And can I just tell you how I cried and how much it just like touched my heart when I was reading this, and all of those elders and members of her community were like here, like she had more recommendations than she ever would have imagined. And it was just so, I loved, this was something else about the community, the Native American community the culture that I absolutely loved, was how much they respect their elders and how well they treat them and take care of them. And that's a huge theme in the book. And it's just because that's part of who they are. And I feel like I really wish that more people did that. Fortunately, I grew up in a family, like I'm Italian American. And Italians are very like loving, big, huge families who like, you come near us and hurt somebody, we're going to hurt you, because our families are so close. So I grew up with, a great respect for my grandparents and my elders, my great aunts and uncles and stuff. And so I feel like I was able to experience that, but I've also had conversations where like with my students at school, some of who say things like, well, my grandma is this, but whatever, I don't really like her, this and this. And I'm like, what did you just say? Like, I would give my life to, like, I would do anything to have my grandparents back with me, because they've all of them have passed away. And then to hear somebody being disrespectful of their grandparents in that way, and, other people who are elders within their community, it just hurts me. So I love that is such a huge part of the Native American culture.
Absolutely. Yeah. And okay. So like, I want to talk about like two things out of what you said. I think we're going to do this a lot where we just keep like picking two things out of what the other person says and keep going. So first, like pieces around Daunis, like being a non-member of her nation, right? Like not a registered member. Like that was done intentionally for multiple reasons. In Canada, our reserve system is different than the States, but effectively, we have a piece of legislation that came into policy that prevented certain people from having those traditional rights. And so they lose their status. That's what it is called. And so it means that they are disenfranchised from the promises the Canadian government, and by extension, the British government, because we are a colony, right? That the Indigenous people, like those broken promises resulted in people not getting what they were promised. And so like that was done very intentionally. Like when you look at the document, it's called the Indian Act, and it's got a bunch of ugly things in it. But when you look at it, it like prevents women who marry white men from having status. But if you were a white woman marrying an Indigenous man, you could have status. It's got all these rules. If you went to university, so any higher education, you would lose your status, so that Indigenous people just couldn't access that like higher education. So if you became like a lawyer, a doctor, a teacher, any of those professions, so then you couldn't have like Indigenous lawmakers, right? Like it was all very, very intentional. And because of that system, my husband actually doesn't have status. So like that piece again was another piece that resonated. And I think like when I read Firekeeper's Daughter, it was just so much of it was like hitting these experiences that obviously transcended like the USA-Canada border, because we're having similar experiences here in Canada within our Indigenous communities. And it was just like, oh my goodness, like that's what my husband is. He is a non-member of his nation, but he's brown. And so he deals with the racism of being Indigenous, but has none of the benefits, right? And so that's kind of what is set up for Daunis, is that she is in her white world to Indigenous and dealing with that racism and that prejudice, but then she's a non-member and has to do all this work to prove that she's enough to be a member. And there's different reasons. Like one of the reasons in the book is monetary, right? So they've got a casino, and the casino gives money to the members. And so it's like an incentive to become a member, but then they're trying to limit how many people can just like willy-nilly trace their heritage back to this one like tribe, right? And so it's like the Indigenous people set some of those boundaries, which is a little bit different than here in Canada, but the result is still the same, that you have people having to prove how Indigenous they are to get those promises, to get those rights. And like that can be really difficult. My husband and I have talked tons about him doing the applications to get status. And honestly, like it's exhausting even to think about it, because there's no guarantee that your application will be approved. That's something that Daunis goes through in the book. So yeah, that's really authentic. And it's like those experiences throughout the book are so authentic all the way throughout. And they translate to I feel like Indigenous people's history in Canada too, right? Like that there's similar themes. Now let's talk about the scene with the elders, because holy smokes, I baby cried. Like
I know,
sobbing, because she like has been volunteering at this like community center with all these elders, listening to their stories, and like she's partly motivated because she's solving this crime, but she's mostly motivated because she wants to be like a strong Anishinaabe woman, like, and it's just she's trying to connect with her culture. So she's going to the source, the knowledge keepers, and they love on her so completely that they all sign her application. And then even with all of their signatures, she only is accepted at the end of the book with like by one vote of the tribal council, right? And so it's like, it just shows you how hard it is to become a member. But that scene where they all like put down their letters, their signed copies, I was just like, oh my goodness, that's not okay. And actually, that's the tweet that I sent to Angeline Boulley. I was like, y'all, everyone needs to go hug their elders, their grandparents.
Seriously,
like go hug an old person, because they are precious resources of wisdom and knowledge, and like we can learn something from how that was represented in this book. And I'm so grateful that she included that scene because it made me feel like a baby, and it was so good.
Well, and the other scene with the elders that I love too is when she's so on the ferry, she's in the car with Levi, and she looks over and sees one of the elders in the car next to her. And she's like, looks at her like, I need help, and tells her like, I need help. And then, like a minute later, the elder mouths to her, get out of the car. And she gets out of the car to escape. And there are all these other elders who are on the ferry, and they block Levi and his car from getting off the ferry because they all like open doors or move their car in such a way or stand in front of it or do these different things. And I'm like, it's not her friends. It's not young people. It's not even like her aunt or uncle or these adult, it's the elders and the community who come to her rescue and save her. And it was like, it's just so sweet. It's another way to honor them too, which I just absolutely love. Like when I lived in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, I worked for part-time. I worked for, it's called Home Instead Senior Care. So it's like a non-medical care. You go into their house and help with like things like doing laundry and cooking and, non-medical things that older people need help with in their house. So I did that. And there was this one woman whose house I went to, and she was just so fascinating. Like she had all of these stories to tell. I felt like she was the old lady from the movie Titanic, where, Rose, because at the end of the movie, they show all the pictures of Rose and like everything that she did in her life. And she's like, she was a pilot and she was an actress and she did this and she did this. And like, that's what this lady felt like to me. Like she would tell me all of these things and I would just be like, so in awe of her and so fascinated. And it's like you just said, like, it's so great to be able to learn from our elders because there's so much that we can learn from them. And I think it's just so important. And so again, I just love how much they are really honored in this book and in Native American culture in general too.
Yeah, literal chills as you were explaining that scene at the end of the book, because it is such a like beautiful scene where the elders are like her saving grace, Daunis's saving grace. And like, I love how that represents how elders today are very aware of their youth. They're very aware of like the harms that their ancestors have gone through, but there's so much hope. And like, I've had the opportunity to work with a lot of fantastic elders who honestly, like I could see doing something like that, like jumping in front of moving vehicles and like putting themselves at risk because they want to protect and empower their youth, right? And it's just like, whoa, in one of the teachings that I've been taught by community members and elders is like the idea of 7 generations. And so it's an Indigenous worldview thing where elders are looking forward 7 generations into the future. And so like that just, and backwards 7 generations, that it demonstrates how much they believe in the youth and prioritizing the youth. And so that reciprocates, like that's the reason Daunis takes care of her elders, right? And so it's like, it's such a beautiful way of being. And then, and it's something that we diminish, I think, in most popular mainstream white culture, is that like we're very afraid of aging, we're very afraid of dying. Elders are like kind of othered, and we don't like, we harm elders in a lot of ways. And so yeah, that refocusing and in such a pivotal, critical moment in the book was just like so well done. So well done. Like she just
I agree.
Yeah, beautiful. So, and like literal goosebumps.
Yes. Some of the other traditions too about the culture that are talked about are, we have like the different spiritual rituals that they do, which I knew that culture is very enriched but she also talks a lot about like the different herbs and medicines that they use. And I really like, I knew that was a part of the culture as well, but I loved hearing about them and learning about more specific ones. Cause I was like, oh, that's really cool. Like to see how this is used for this. And even like for her, what they call their moon cycle, which we just call our time of the month, their period or ant flow, whatever you will. Even with that, like how that's taken in a different way and seen in a different way. And how like when she's on her cycle, she talks to the gods in a different way and uses like different herbs and things. So it was really interesting to like learn a lot about that kind of stuff as well too. But I think the one that got me the most, that I was like, I was kind of shocked by it at first, because when we find out about it, it's on page 34. Okay. This book is like almost 500 pages long. So it's right away at the beginning of the book, and there's not an explanation for it. And so I was kind of like, I don't know what I think about this. So this is the blanket parties. Okay. So I'm going to read this. A blanket party is when a guy does something bad to a woman and her female cousins take him into the woods, rolled in a blanket, and beat the mooin out of him. Okay. So when I read that, again, this is 34 pages in, and we don't really know like what's going to happen yet and what's to come. I was taken aback by that. I was like, wow, that's really like crazy to me. And I didn't think about it in the correct way. Like I didn't think about it like a sexual assault. Like it was, because it just says, when he does something bad to her. And like, I just simply read it like that, like very simply, like with no like in-depth look at it when I first read it. And so I was kind of like, that seems really wrong and seems really violent. But then when we get to the later part of the book where the sexual assault occurs, and then even later at the end, where we find out that Grant isn't going to be charged for raping Daunis. And then when I read the author's note, actually at the end of the book as well, it made so much more sense to me. And then I was like, okay, I understand, because and part of the purpose of this book, as she says in the author's note, is to show all the acts of violence that happen against Native American women. And until I read this book, I didn't realize how bad it was, like how much Native American women were targeted in this way. And so it was very eye-opening for me. And again, while it was hard to read, because even though I was warned, again, when the sexual assault scene happens, like it kind of comes out of nowhere. I mean, she does kind of set it up where you're like, it's like a prom type situation, because they're at the Shagala. So and then there's the come up with me to my hotel room so we can talk about this. And so you are like, okay, this is what's going to happen. Please don't go to the room with him. But it just seemed like outside of that, like the actual scene where it happens, it came out of nowhere. Like I wasn't like, we know that Grant is a bad guy, but I just wasn't expecting that to happen. But then, yeah, just after reading that and how it happened to her and how Grant's not going to get prosecuted because it occurred on Native American land, which meant that it was up to the government to decide if they wanted to charge him or not. She probably wasn't going to get justice for it. So, after reading about this, it just really opened my eyes to the kind of violence that occurs against Native American women. And that's something that Angeline Boulley said that she really wanted to bring attention to because it's not known well enough. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And like, okay, I'm going to try to get through sharing a little bit about this without like totally breaking my heart. But like, as I said, my daughter is brown and I am very aware. I have a social work degree. So I studied a lot of like injustice and kind of systems that lead to injustice as part of my university academic studies. And so like I have a sister-in-law and a mother-in-law who are also brown. And so like violence toward Indigenous women isn't a surprise to me. And it's something that I care very deeply of and about. And then with my daughter now, it's like a whole nother level because I do not have the same risks that she does based on her intersectional identity. And that's really scary, right? And so then, like, when I think about just how little justice there is for Indigenous women, missing and murdered Indigenous women, it's like, it guts me because, like, that is not okay. It is wrong on so many deep levels. And like, I get the reason that it feels as though justice has to be enacted by these women. They're kind of reclaiming some power. And so is it a violent and harsh and ugly thing? Yes, the blanket ritual is, but when you understand the risks and the violence toward Indigenous women, like doing that learning, it makes sense. And like, we know that violence towards women is often dismissed, period. And so when you add the intersectional identity of being racialized or being trans, like, you just increase the risk, right? And that breaks my heart, especially because I am in a safer position than my daughter is, just based on the color of my skin, and then kind of feeling like helpless too, right? Like, protect her from that ugliness, right? So I really love how Angeline Boulley does that just really small teaching on page 34. And then after the rape, after the climax of the story, when Daunis is in the hospital, she asks her auntie to get justice for her. And her aunt at the beginning of the book was explaining, like, these are ugly ceremonies, these are ugly practices, we don't do them lightly. But then when Daunis is harmed, when she's hurt, her aunt does, right? Like, she's going to get justice for her niece, because that's what like Indigenous women have had to do. They've had to advocate for themselves. They've had to do the safety, the protective, the alert, and that's like so much responsibility to put on a person, but that's what we've created, right? And then at the very, very end, you've got the like ceremony with all the women who've been hurt, and so you end on this like totally bittersweet note where, like, yes, there was violence done, and then women responded with violence, but then at the end there's this healing like ceremony, this healing ritual. The women come together, and every woman attending has been hurt, has been violently harmed by a man, but they've carved out this space where they're healing and where they share that hurt, and how Daunis's aunt shares with Daunis that, like, her friend Lily had been attending these gatherings, these women's gatherings for years, and that, like, Daunis hadn't attended one because she had never been harmed in that way by a man, right? And that Lily had hoped Daunis would never have to attend because the way you're included in that circle is because you've experienced violence. And so, like, after Daunis is raped by Grant, then she attends this space, and it's like, it's heartbreaking because that's such a horrible way to be included in something, but demonstrates how, like, these women weren't just violent, right? Like, they weren't just getting revenge. There was like hope and healing and resolution and justice all connected to it. And so it was very intentional. The reason that, like, the blanket ritual, the blanket ceremony, blanket party. Thank you. The blanket party, and then at the end, this gathering of women. Like, I love how the author kind of bookmarked or bookended the story with those two very important scenes, and then like, yeah, drove home the point that women, Indigenous women, are hurt and harmed and missing and murdered at a much higher rate than like non-racialized women, right? And so, yeah, this is something that really makes everything in me ache, because like I feel very ill-equipped to protect my daughter against that as a white woman, right? And I think like there's just so much hurt for my Indigenous relatives who live that and don't have the privilege of taking off that fear, right? Because there are many spaces where they aren't safe.
I want to read what the author put in her author's note about this, just so that everyone who's listening really has an understanding of how severe this is and how much has happened. More than 4 in 5, which is 84%, Native women have experienced violence in their lifetime, and more than half, 56%, have experienced sexual violence. Nearly all of the Native women, 97%, who have experienced violence had at least one non-Native perpetrator. So, I mean, those are really high numbers. You know, like when I read that, I had no idea that the numbers were that high. I mean, that's so, again, it's like she even says in here, she says it's a difficult and exhausting narrative, but it's really important to show the reality of those experiences and what happens, and how with the jurisdictional stuff with tribal lands, like how that controls what happens and how these men, if they're prosecuted or not, because like we find out, you know, when, like you said, when Daunis is talking to her auntie, you know, the resort where she was raped is on tribal land. So it's up to the federal government to decide if they're going to press charges or not against Grant, especially because Daunis wasn't a tribal member yet at that time. So if she had been a tribal member, I guess it would have been different, but she wasn't one at that time. And Daunis even says, you know, I think he planned this. I think he planned to do that because he knows that he couldn't be prosecuted for it and he could get away with it. And he's done this before, you know, and she warns his son's girlfriend to stay away from Grant. So it's heart-wrenching to read it. And, you know, like I said, when we get introduced to the blanket party, it's on page 34. And if you don't know about the culture, like I didn't know that aspect of it, then it doesn't make sense. But then after reading the rest of the book and reading her author's note, it makes total sense, because it's the only way that they feel that they can get justice, which is not fair. And it's really sad. And I feel like those words are not even adequate enough to describe it.
Right. Yeah.
So.
Well, and in Canada, like it's such a big issue that we're just starting to talk about, with a lot of advocacy from our Indigenous communities. Like it's such it's becoming a larger and larger issue and focus. Like Canadians, like there was an entire inquest, a national inquest into missing and murdered Indigenous Canadians and women. So particularly women, and even in the inquest, we didn't do it to, I would think, the standard that would demonstrate like accurate numbers. And so we know that the data is much lower than it actually is. Like it's just, there are horror stories. There are horror stories around being victimized because you're an Indigenous woman, and that's not right. No. And it's sickening and horrible, but it's a direct product of like racism in North America, and sexism in North America. And so you put both of those two things together and you get this like hybrid, disgusting ugliness, and our systems protect that. And so like I really appreciate that Angeline Boulley included that as content in this story, even though it was really hard to read and hard to work through and hard to grapple with. But like the story itself, it is a small part of the story. It's not the main focus. It's not the entire thing is about the blanket party, but it's there because that's reality, right? And so when we said that this book was very realistic, it's because it is. It's not that the violence towards Daunis or Indigenous women was the entire story. Daunis isn't just a victim. The story is not about her rape, but it's part of her story. And so then you get this beautiful story, this dynamic story that has hard things in it. And I think that's why it's so realistic and resonates with so many readers and Indigenous readers, particularly because of their experience.
Right. So like you said, this is not even the main part of the story. It's something that happens and it's there because it needs to be. So let's talk about what is kind of the main plot line and storyline of the book. So we have this whole drug ring. Okay. So Daunis's best friend, Lily, her boyfriend uses drugs and he ends up murdering Lily in front of Daunis. You know, he's high. He wants to, Lily had broken up with him and he wants to get back together. And she says, no, you know, we can't do this. I can't be with you. And Travis like totally loses it. And Daunis happens to stumble across them when she goes outside from the party or wherever they are at that moment. I can't remember. And, you know, Travis is like going crazy and he said he doesn't want to lose Lily. And he ends up shooting Lily and killing her. And then he kills himself. And Daunis witnesses this. And I'm reading it and I'm thinking to myself, I cannot even fathom, like, it would destroy me, like absolutely destroy me if, number one, if my best friend were murdered, but number two, if I witnessed it as well. And number three, like, and that's now as a 41-year-old. If I were 18, Daunis is 18. I cannot even fathom like what that would do to me as an 18-year-old. If it would destroy me now, like there's no way I could handle it as an 18-year-old either, you know? And so she goes through this incredibly hard thing and it's because of the drug use, and then ends up becoming, she finds out her uncle was a criminal informant, a CI. She finds out that Jamie, her love interest, is an undercover cop, all because of, you know, and all these things like happen at once. And then Jamie and his fake uncle, Ron, who's also an undercover agent, then are like, hey, Daunis, would you come aboard and be a CI for us and help us figure out this drug ring? Now, I don't know about you, but if this were to happen to 18-year-old Leah, okay, 18-year-old Leah has just witnessed her best friend get shot and murdered by her ex-boyfriend. And then the boyfriend kills commits suicide. Like that happens in front of me. Then all this other stuff unfolds on top of it. And then they're going to say to me, oh, by the way, we want you to be a confidential informant. I'm going to be like, are you kidding me? Like, I'm kind of out with this. I don't see me processing it and handling that at all. Like all of that at once, especially. And yet she does it. But because she's driven by her love for Lily and wanting justice for her and her community, which again, just coming back to like the Native American culture and how important their community is to them. Like it comes back to that, because that was the other reason that she really kept doing it, not just for Lily and her uncle too, to find out what happened to her uncle, but it was really also for her community. So this drug ring like sparks a lot. I mean, and that's, you know, our main storyline that we follow. So
yeah, the main conflict is like finding out what the new drug is, and the reason that Daunis is brought in is because the FBI think, or they believe that the new drugs that are being distributed and created are like
Use
using
the mushrooms.
indigenous medicines. Yeah.
Mhm.
So the kind of I like that the main conflict is central to indigenous knowledge and medicines. And so it's kind of like the hurt around these drugs, particularly for Daunis, is that there's this perversion of her traditional medicines, and she cares very deeply about biology and science and kind of the place where science and traditional knowledge connect, right? And so that's really, really interesting. And like I think it is like there's a lot of trauma that happens really quickly once the story is established, once the climbing action, like you fall in love with Lily at the beginning of the book. She's so fun and vibrant and full of life and interesting. And then she's murdered. And from there, the trauma picks up pretty quickly. I do a lot of trauma work in my job. I'm, like I said, I have a social work degree and I'm a school counselor. I've worked with Indigenous communities in the past, and trauma is a reality, right? Because of the intergenerational hurts that have happened to Indigenous people through colonialism, like that you can't escape it. And so there's a level of resiliency, I think, in Daunis because of the reality of who she is and what her community has been through. But I also know that people like have hidden depths, and like we are all capable of doing hard things.
Yes.
Like really hard things. And so like, yes, Daunis is super strong and she's written as a very strong, independent Indigenous woman. But I do think like for myself, I would be destroyed. Absolutely. I don't know if I would fall apart until my brain would have time to catch up. And I think that Daunis kind of uses her work and this opportunity to be a CI as a way to distract her brain, right? From having to process the hurt that she's experiencing. And so she kind of skims the surface, but then she throws herself into like this investigation with almost an obsession,
right?
Because she wants the justice, but it's also easier than feeling hurt. And that's quite authentic for trauma, like as a trauma response. Some people use like harmful things, substance abuse and other behaviors. But Daunis is like choosing to try to chase justice instead, but it's still a trauma response. So I feel like it's still believable in maybe if Daunis wasn't who she is with her intersectional identity, it'd be kind of weird. But it's like, I do believe that she had these hidden depths and that it is a trauma response, and it's so intense, right? So yeah, I don't know. And like for my best friend or for my sisters or for my daughter, there's a lot that I could do if I was motivated enough by their loss, right?
Yeah. I think, you bring up a good point in saying how she goes into like and agrees to be a CI for Jamie and Ron. And it's distracting. It's a distraction for her and keeps her really busy and looking into it. And she more like really mourns Lily kind of later, because she is just like in this mindset of, I have to make this right. I have to figure out what's happening. And this, you're right. Like this point in the book, this is where it all goes, like gets super intense after this. Cause it's kind of, there's a lot that happens before this point, but then when we get to the point where Travis kills Lily and then commits suicide, like from then on, the rest of the book is just heavy material, because she gets deeper and deeper into this and trying to figure out what's going on, what the drug is made of, who's in charge of the drug ring, like where did this even start? Who is dealing the drugs? Who is, where are they coming from? She gets, and then the whole thing with Grant and her relationship with Jamie in the middle of all of this.
Yeah. Right. Right.
So it's like, so there's a lot of, it's a lot. Like you hit this one point in the book and that's where it becomes really heavy and all the stuff happens and you're like, okay, because even her relationship with Jamie, which I do want to talk a little bit more about, of course, but I was going to end on that because that's kind of like our lighter note. Like we can end on a lighter note by talking about that. But even her relationship with Jamie, though, like it's not super easy either, so there's a lot even with that happens. So it's just, yeah, very heavy material, but again, very realistic. And it's
told so masterfully, like told so masterfully that even though it's heavy, the pace is so good, the characters are dynamic, like all of the storytelling pieces are so well done that it's easy to read, even though it's heavy material, right? And so that is amazing. That is like a really, really strong writer who can navigate such heavy themes and scenes and content, but still have your readers so invested in the story, right?
Right. Yeah. It definitely is a credit to her. I mean, her writing is fantastic. So then we have too, she finds out that Levi, her brother, I mean, half brother, but her brother is the one who's the head of the drug ring. Like her brother, it's her brother.
I kind of felt that one, like it didn't surprise me. And the coach, like, so the other theme in this book that's really, really important is hockey, because Daunis is a hockey player and she's had an injury, so she can't play hockey. And that's kind of preventing her from achieving the dreams that she had for herself. And she's like, one of the reasons I love Daunis is because she's tall and athletic. Like she's not kind of small and diminutive. And I'm 6 feet tall. And like I played sports and was very involved in athletics all through high school. And so I never felt dainty. And so Daunis being like this like buff woman, I was just like, yes, she's awesome. I really love that about her.
Yes.
But like that it didn't really surprise me that her hockey coach and her brother were the ones behind the drugs in the community.
Yeah.
Especially because her brother and her have this relationship that's set up in such a precarious way. Like he's, like Mia said, her half brother, but it's because their father, so Daunis and Levi share the same father, and they're only 9 months apart because Daunis's mother was pregnant with Daunis, was sent away, and Daunis's father had an affair and with Levi's mother. And so like this all happens and kind of fed to you in like little spoonfuls throughout the story. That there's like this weird family history and you're not exactly sure what's going on. So like Levi's relationship and his character is kind of positioned in an awkward space, but then he's almost too nice to her. Like I was always really suspicious about him because he's like really nice to her, and I was like, I don't know many brothers who are that nice to their sisters.
Right?
And then the coach, I was like, I got Stevie feelings from the coach way early in the book. And I was just like, it's you're the guy.
Okay. So, but did you think that Levi's mother was going to be involved? Because I
did.
Okay. Because I was kind of like, what?
I thought she was going to know about it, like because she's a judge in the tribe, right? And so I thought she was going to know more about it, and I guess she knew to an extent because she was trying to she was persecuting or she was ruling on different cases in different ways, kind of protecting Levi, but I thought she was going to be way more involved than that. Like I thought she was going to know about it and kind of been maybe not cooking the drugs or anything like that, but more invested, I guess, in the process. So I was really ready to like her. I'm kind of sad that she wasn't in the end as likable because I don't love when we pit female characters against each other in books. That always makes me cringe a little bit. And so because Daunis's mother and Levi's mother have this history, I was kind of sad that she was antagonized a little bit, but then she wasn't all the way through. And so I was really excited to really like Levi's mother, and think she was a really cool person, and like that, you know, the father made a mistake and now they're all mature about it. But then the mother, in the end, Levi's mother, ends up being not so cool and like pretty harmful to Daunis. And I was kind of like, whoa.
I mean,
that's gross.
She helps Mike, like she drugs Daunis to kidnap her.
Yeah.
I mean, that was really, I was dark. Like, what just happened? Because like, even if she, like, even if I thought, okay, Levi's mom, Dana, could be involved. Okay. I did not expect her to go to that extent where she drugged Daunis to help Mike and Levi and Stormy kidnap her to bring her, because they had also kidnapped Jamie. And I was like, she just drugged her. She drugged her.
And what was the motivation for it? Was it like because she was scared of Mike, or was it because she's trying to get Daunis out of the picture for whatever reason, because of the jealousies between the moms? Like I was kind of I was very confused by her character the whole way through. I think
me too.
Was my issue, because she was shady, super shady. And actually that does remind me, like, we've been talking about how like authentic and realistic this book is, how much it like celebrates Indigenous culture and Indigenous excellence. But one thing that I really appreciate is that like the author doesn't gloss over things. Like it's not like she's painting this idealistic version of what res life looks like.
Right.
So like drugs and hurt and pain and violence, like that's all authentic to the experience. And she's not like trying to like buff that out. Right. So like the Indigenous characters aren't perfect. And like they're not stereotypes either. So it's just refreshing to see like an authentic an authentic cast of Indigenous characters being represented in such like a multitude of ways, right? So you've got like Dana, and she's, you know, empathetic, or you're sympathetic to her a little bit because she's a single mom and she's also lost her husband, but then she's like really shady and abusing her power and her privilege and position. And like that gets uglier and uglier. And then you've got Levi, who's like a young Indigenous man, and you feel sympathy for him because he's like lost his father and he's obviously lost himself. But then he's doing horrible things to his sister, right? And like murder. He's like an accomplice for murder. And like, so it's just like they're not all the characters aren't perfect. Right. And I like that, like even the Indigenous characters aren't all perfect, because it'd be really easy to like try to overcompensate and make it as though like there are no problems, that all Indigenous people are like not struggling, but that wouldn't be authentic. And then you've got characters like Daunis's aunt who has struggled but has gone through the healing process and is like this super powerful, strong woman. And it's like, so not all Indigenous people are broken either, right? Like you get this spectrum, I guess is the word, of just real experiences, real people, characters that aren't one-sided. And it's so good to see that, and not just like as a one-off, you know, like it's not like there's a token Indigenous person and that person is a stereotype. It's everyone is interesting and diverse and deeply well-rounded.
Because her aunt is a great character as well.
Such a good character.
I mean, she's such a strong character, and she's very much, you know, enveloped in all of the Ojibwe traditions and the culture and how they do things, and trying to help Daunis, you know, and help her to grow in her native roots, you know, and she's so very protective of Daunis, but she's also like this woman who has gone through a lot of things herself. And so she understands all of this. And so she's trying to help guide Daunis at the same time. And she's almost in some ways more of a mother to Daunis than Daunis's own mother, which is really sad. Like that was kind of a sad aspect, but I mean, that does happen. Like that happens, you know, again.
Well, and kinship is different. Like in Indigenous, in many Indigenous like cultures and traditions, like kinship looks very different. We kind of talked about that in terms of like the intergenerational respect for elders and youth, but like that big auntie energy, right? Like auntie capital A is like a concept, and like you have aunties that aren't even related to you, you have uncles that aren't even related to you, and everyone is your cousin, and it's because community is kinship. And so like I love like the auntie character, and I also love that she's not perfect either. Like at one point she yells at Daunis and like, or is sharp with Daunis about like, well, you're white, how can you understand, sort of idea. And she's like, just like ignore it, go live your nice life, go to university, shack up with
Jamie,
and enjoy his pretty face, you know. And it's like, and she's kind of like mean, but what she's saying is that you have the privilege of not being like stuck here, right? Because you've got money, because you've got a way out. And I think a lot of especially Indigenous youth feel that at some point too. So I like that she was mean in some ways and kind of harsh, but then she loves Daunis so fully that you know it's coming out of this place of like fear and concern and love. And so like, again, not a flat character, super dynamic and just so important to the story.
Oh yes. She drives so much of it. Yeah. She's very, very important for the story. I want to end on a lighter note. Like we have dealt with lots of heavy content in this book, which it needs to be. And I'm really glad that we're able to talk about all of these things. But I want to talk about Jamie and Daunis and end on kind of like a lighter note here. It's a relationship.
Let's do it.
I just loved it. Although I did kind of feel like this relationship was kind of doomed from the start. Like it's fun because it is the like fake relationship which turns into a real relationship love trope, you know, and then we do have the like forced trip that they have to take together, which always leads to stuff. And, you know, so he's a hockey player, right? And she has this thing that she says to Lily where she's like, well, I have to keep hockey world separate from my other world. Right. And anytime somebody says that, like, in a book like this, like I have to separate this world from this world. So I can't date this person. You know, it's going to happen. So, but I did kind of feel like once we found out that Jamie was an undercover agent, I was like, oh crap, this isn't going to work. Like, I just felt like it was kind of doomed from the start, you know, and there's so many ups and downs because she finds that out and she's like, what the heck? Have you been lying to me this whole time? And then, you know, their relationship is such a roller coaster, up and down. And oh man,
it might be the most unbelievable thing about the book. Does that make sense? Like just because it was so like I have a more difficult time believing that an undercover agent would fall in love while on assignment, but I think they kind of like it's explained in the story. What I love about their relationship is that there is like this maturity in tone, even though like you get all those tropes in there and it's super, super fun. Like they end the relationship on a very mature note. Yes. And in a way that was quite satisfying to me because it still left room for hope. And so like in my little headcanon, after all of the struggle and all of the hurt and all the trauma, that like Jamie and Daunis go their own ways and they do that in a very amicable, caring way, that they come back together eventually. And then they have what Daunis's aunt and uncle have, that level of respect, that level of self-love that then influences the love they have for each other. Like, I'm just like, that is what happens. I refuse to believe anything else because they both deserve happiness.
That's right. That's right. I mean, who's to say that doesn't happen? I'm sure it does.
I'm going to write fan fiction. about that.
There you go. Done. I kind of feel like it's okay. This is going to sound really, I don't know. So being, having been a theater major in school, there was always this thing where when you do a show, who's going to have the showmance? Who's going to have who's going to have the relationship with somebody else in the cast, right? Like you take bets on it. Like who's this going to happen to?
Most theater
because
student thing.
It really is. And I kind of felt like that's what Jamie and Daunis's relationship was. Like it was a showmance. It was.
I'm so writing down the word showmance. I've never heard that in my life, and I love it. Oh,
You're welcome.
That's a title for a book.
Right? But I feel like that's exactly what Jamie and Daunis's relationship is, because they're thrown together in this situation. They wouldn't have necessarily been together before. And, they never met before this, obviously. And they're going through a lot. There's a lot that happens during this time. And so they're drawn together. So they develop this relationship. But then in the end, they're like, oh, like after all, it's all over, reality hits and you're like, okay, so that was great, but we actually kind of need to go our separate ways. Cause in reality, I have to do this and you have to do this. We're still figuring out who we are. Like, this isn't going to work. And that's what it made me think of. Cause that happens so much. Like when you're in college theater.
I just love that.
Oh my gosh.
So much.
I'm telling you.
And it's such an apt way to describe what happens between Jamie and Daunis. And like Jamie is a lovely character. Like he's quite interesting because he has like he's attractive as the persona that he's put on. And so when you find out that he's an undercover agent, you realize, whoa, like he's not who he says he is. There's some really serious implications for that. But then like same as Daunis, the reader is kind of left trying to sift through what is really Jamie and what was just like his performative like persona that he was putting on for the case. So I get what you're saying, where it's like it was kind of doomed from the beginning. But I think it's really cool that like part of the authenticity of their relationship, part of the things that, or one of the things that makes their relationship so mature, is that Daunis actually helped Jamie understand who he is and kind of challenges at him to figure out who he is, because Daunis has done a lot of work on herself trying to understand who she is as a biracial white and Indigenous woman, whereas like Jamie, he is disenfranchised. He knows that he is Cherokee, but he doesn't really have community. He's doing a lot of this like undercover work because he's brown, but for no real like invested reason. It's not because he's trying to protect communities the way Daunis is trying to do. And so like she pushes back on that. And I love that. Like I love that even though their relationship is kind of doomed, they obviously very deeply care about each other. Yes. And then they do help each other be better people. And that's the reason that I want them to end up together, even though they have a showman. But like I want them to go do that work and then come back together because their origin story is just so fantastic. How could they not?
It is. It really is. And I mean, they could come back together. He does send her that postcard. So there is
so
hope,
good.
Just,
I felt like that was such a like generous little thing to do
it was.
For the reader.
It was.
Could have left it after the hospital scene and just kind of like not have included that, but by including the little postcard, you're like, oh, they still keep in touch. Oh my goodness, there's hope.
There is hope. There is hope. She gave us that little seed at the end to kind of help us all process at the end and then move on. Okay. I can have hope at the end. And Daunis is going off to Hawaii of all places for college. And so, and as I'm reading this, I'm thinking, man, I wish I had gone to college in Hawaii. What the heck? No.
Me too.
It's purposeful. Honestly, it is purposeful though. Because of the program that they have that she wants to study. But so she's going there and he's off wherever he is exploring. And so it's fun. I did like their relationship. It was aggravating at times because it was so up and down, but it was also expected because he did lie. I mean, nature of his job, like he had to lie to her a lot. And there were things, but she was still like, I love you. I'm still really concerned about you. Oh my gosh, I kidnapped you. Nobody's going to find us because there's no cell service out here, you know? So yeah, it was still very real. And like I said, showmance, but I loved it.
So good. And
yeah,
like swoony, very swoony. I'm always here for the angsty romance. So
of course. All right. Well, I think that is a good note to end upon. So as Victoria said, she is going to have her own young adult debut novel come out in 2024. And so why don't you tell everybody where they can follow you on social media and learn all about all the things you've got going on?
Yes, absolutely. I'd love to. So the big thing, I think that people, maybe one of the big misconceptions is that like authors are raking in a lot of cash and dough and that we're making a lot of money on books. It's not true. I have a day job. I'm a counselor. I write stories because I'm a storyteller and I love YA and I write stories for the people I work with for the students I work with so that they have something that they can see themselves in. And I also write it for me because I still want to be a teenager. And so like right now I'm at a really interesting point in my career because like I'm building my audience before my book comes out. And this is a really good time for people to go and find me on social media. You can say that you got there before my book is published and I become famous. That sounds super arrogant, but that's the goal.
Yes.
and so like this is a good time to do that. You can find me on pretty much like all social media platforms. Instagram is the one that I'm most active on, but I also have like Facebook, Twitter. I also have TikTok now because my sister made me join. And for all of those platforms, it's at Victoria Koops, Koops, right? You can also find my website, victoriakoops.com. And yeah, just come along for the journey because I'm trying to be pretty transparent about my writing process, about publishing, about set up my publishing deal. And this is my debut book. So when Leah was like, some people you can tell it's their debut novel, I'm like, oh boy, I better not be one of those.
He wasn't talking about you. I actually had a very specific author and book series in mind when I said that. I'm not going to say who it is, but it was, yes, not all. It's just sometimes. I know. I did not mean to put that pressure on you.
It's totally fine. I'm teasing, but I'm super excited. I'm super excited about kind of the shape my writing career is taking. And actually, I'm super excited to be working on my second novel as well right now. So, yeah, the first one is just the beginning and buckle up, folks. Here we go. So come find me on all the socials.
I will put links in there to all the stuff so you guys can just look in the show notes for today and easily find Victoria and go follow along with her journey. And then when her book comes out, I will, of course, have her on as a guest, but as an author, and we will chat about her book, which is going to be so exciting. Like it's 2 years away, but I am like super excited for this already. So, but
it feels like such a long time from now, but like
it's going to go by
so quickly. And like my edits are due in December 2022. So that's how long it takes to produce a book, folks, is like a year and a half, just so you know.
Yeah, it's not fast. So but in the meantime, you could also listen to plenty of the other episodes that Victoria and I have done together because there are a lot of them. So, and they're always fabulous. All right. Well, thank you so much for being here. You were the perfect person to do this book with. And I'm so glad that we were able to have some like real, honest and raw conversations about this book. It was really fantastic.
Yes. Thank you so much for having me, Leah.
Of course. And thank you to all of my fantastic listeners for your continued support and listening to the podcast. And we will chat again soon. Today's episode featured the book Firekeeper's Daughter by Angeline Boulley. Be sure to follow YA Book Chat on Facebook and Instagram. And don't forget to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts so you get your episodes as soon as they are available. And hey, if you listen on Apple Podcasts, why not leave a positive review and a 5-star rating? It really helps boost the podcast. YA Book Chat was created by, is hosted and edited by me, Leah Stuhler.